When the barn burned down, the chickens died. Saturn spread her talons wide across the field. December twins were running. The baby came 2 months too soon. The tide rolls by the Texas moon. With every wave another star returning. The mystery of misery winds through earth's fragility. The witches of the hill country are under their stars again. At harvest, problem males are slain. The witches taken back again. The pains of loss and gains of toil are welling. Our workers' hands must know the land. Their lovers' lips must understand the role of hell within the witch's dwelling. The mystery of misery winds through earth's fragility. The witches of the hill country are under their stars again. Red went out and killed the deer. The milky goats are acting queer. The cactus shows love's fiery white is owing. When Odin came to claim his prize, it rained a rain that drained the skies. A night so clear the Milky Way was glowing. The mystery of misery winds through earth's fragility. The witches of the hill country are under their stars again. They're under their stars again. So I wrote that one spring after I had just been living for a few weeks with my boyfriend in New York City, and we had taken the train up there from New Orleans and had a good time living together. And after that I was going to go on tour with my band, and he was going to go down to Texas because he wanted to have a polyamorous open relationship with me, and there was this other woman he wanted to go be with outside of Austin. who lived on a farm. And I was really worried about this, that he was going to leave me for her, and I was sad and envious, and the whole time I was on tour, it was really hard to get in touch with him. Every time I would reach him by phone, he'd say, I don't really want to talk right now, I'm hanging out with my friends, and I just felt really left out, and every little bit I did get about what they're doing together, like eating dinner or going to yoga class, I would just feel really jealous that he was doing that with her and leaving me out. And I was going to go meet them later after my tour and meet her, and we were going to all hang out, and I had a lot of anxiety about that, if she'd like me, and if I'd feel really uncomfortable there. And I also was, probably because of all this stress, I was a couple weeks late on my period, and I started getting really worried that maybe I was pregnant, and what would I do if I found this out and he wouldn't even talk to me on the phone. And so I decided I wouldn't tell him I was worrying about this until I had the result from the test. And I took the test, and it was negative, and I remember I was talking to him on the phone, checking in, and the reception on the cell phone was really difficult, and I had told him I'd taken this pregnancy test, but he couldn't hear what I was saying the result was, and he found his way away from his friends to go get a better reception and talk to me and hear me. And I was just telling him, oh yeah, it turns out it's negative, and he was saying, oh, okay, well then I'm going to get back to my friends then. And he just didn't have any sense of like how much of relief or a concern that had been for me, and it was just like this brief window into him actually trying to talk to me when he didn't know the result of the test. And it was just, I mean, a lot of people will decide not to go see him, but for me it was just like, I gotta get there and be part of his life again. We've been living together, and he's leaving me for this other person. If I don't get there, it's all over, and it's all my fault. And I had a plane ticket to go visit them a few days after my tour ended, because that was the cheapest ticket I could get, and I, wasn't making much money. But I was just so anxious and impatient to get there that I ended up buying a sooner plane ticket, and they wouldn't let me cancel my old one, because that's how a lot of airlines are. And so I lost the whole first cost of the first plane ticket, and got this sooner one that was super expensive. And for me, it kind of represented like taking care of my needs and using my money to support that, instead of just always blocking myself with what I think is a better financial decision. And so I got to Austin, to the airport, and they picked me up, and I really did like this woman that he was with. She was really cool, and I liked hanging out with them. And then when he and I got some time to talk later, I was asking him, so what's going on between them and what's ended up happening, because he wasn't really keeping in contact with me about this while I was gone. And he told me that he didn't end up getting with that woman, but there was this other woman that he had just met, and he ended up being with her, and I knew nothing of her, and she was like the wrong one. This isn't even who he had like put me through all this agony to go leave me for. He just was like, oh, I'll be with this one instead. And one of the insecurities was I was a bit older than him, and I felt insecure about that, and this woman he was now with was a lot younger. And we were staying with the other friend he was supposed to leave me for on her beautiful farm in Texas, and we decided we were going to go to the Kerrville Folk Festival, which is in Central Texas, a songwriter festival. And so we went there, and it was pouring rain when we got there, and we slept in someone else's tent because we couldn't put ours up in this much rain in the middle of the night. And then in the morning we're walking around, and the first person we see is this young woman that he is lovers with now, and I had no idea she would be there. I don't know if he knew, but I was like unwarned that this was going to be the situation. Like, we're all hanging out at this festival. I was unprepared to be around her, and just all they did was like flirt with each other, and we had to eat all our meals together because we're this group of friends. And it wasn't that horrible, but every once in a while she'd like make some weird comment. Like, I mean, I was in my 20s, I was not that old, but she'd like touch my hair and be like, "Oh, are you getting like a little bit of salt and pepper hair coming in?" And I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe she's doing this." And he told me that he wanted to sleep in her tent instead of mine one of these nights, and I would spend days just like anxious and like walking around, not able to enjoy myself, wondering where he was and where she was and what they were doing, and just really preoccupied with it. And we were volunteering to be at this fest, so a lot of the time we were just at our volunteer work, but I'd look for them when I got off and usually not find them, or would find them and they'd be just like cuddling somewhere, and it was just like a really difficult situation for me. And I eventually made some other friends who like actually wanted to spend time with me at the festival, and that felt good, and they're still friends to this day. But I decided that since I was at this songwriter festival and I had all this potent angst energy, I would write a song. And the last song I had thought about writing was when I had been talking to the woman who had the farm, he was supposed to leave me for. She told me this wild story of what happened like a year or two ago when she had her Saturn return, which is in zodiac astrology, where Saturn is going through the same transit as it did when you were born, and it usually makes all these really wild things happen in your life that really make you have to grow up and take responsibility and change your life and ask all these new questions, and all kinds of things that happened in their life, like as is listed in the song. Their farm had a barn full of chickens that caught fire and burned to the ground. They lost all their chickens, and they had bought the farm. So the woman he was in love with had a twin sister, and they were twins who bought the farm with another married couple who was pregnant, and they were going to have the baby and live there, but the baby came too early and needed more medical care, and they just weren't ready to be running a farm now that they had this new issue to deal with, and weren't ready for the baby to be there yet, and so they ended up having to not go in on the farm with them, and so the twins were left with the financial responsibility that was double what they expected. And they also had this really good friend who had the same exact birth date as them, even though she wasn't their sister, but they were really close with her and felt like they had known each other in past lives, and she was kind of like their third sister, like their triplet. And during that wild year, there was just a freak accident where that third sister died, and so that's the witches taken back again, because they told me about all these just uncanny powers that this really amazing woman had, and she had all these guns and lived out in the middle of the country in Texas, and the neighbors called the cops on her at one point because she was shooting guns at this party with her friends. But when the cops showed up, she just came to the door wearing like underwear and holding a gun, and they're like, "You live here by yourself? You're this young woman in your 20s and you're out here in the middle of Texas. Of course you need guns. We're not gonna get you in trouble." Like, the Texas police were like all about her having guns, and she would always warn the twins about the power they have of their mind, because they could just think something and it would change someone's whole life. And she was an herbalist, and she knew all these things about witchcraft and occult things, and so I thought of them all as these really powerful witches who live. The area outside of Austin, Texas is called the Hill Country, and I thought of Odin as I had just been reading about Odin in American Gods by Neil Gaiman, and how he can take human sacrifices sometimes, and I wondered if maybe during that period that was kind of like a human sacrifice when that witch was taken back again, and so that's how it became part of the mythology of the song. And it originally only had 2 verses, the first one I sang and the last one, and I made a music video with a friend of mine in LA later before I had this 3rd verse, but I saw those twins again like a year or 2 later and just caught up with them on their life, and with some of the new stuff that had happened in their life, I wrote that middle verse. And so that is the story of the Saturn return of the hill country witches. Thank you.